Those ways include brain-machine interface, pharmacology, behavioral practices, and those behavioral practices, of course, can include some do's. So I'm not going to tell you what to do or what to take. I'm going to describe what the literature tells us and suggests about ways to access plasticity. But once that's in place, the question then is, how do I access this alertness? So now let's talk about how we would translate all this scientific information and history into some protocols that you can actually apply, because I think that's what many of you are interested in, and I'm willing to bet that most of you are not interested in lowering electrodes into your nucleus basalis, and frankly, neither am I. In episode 1 of the Huberman Lab podcast, I described the various ways that people can monitor and change their nervous system. Those ways include brain-machine interface, pharmacology, behavioral practices, and those behavioral practices, of course, can include some do's, do this, and some don'ts, don't do that, etc. In thinking about neuroplasticity, I want to have a very frank conversation about what one can do, but also acknowledge this untapped capacity that I'm just not hearing about out there, which is one can also combine behavioral practices with pharmacology. One can combine behavioral practices with brain-machine interface. And you don't have to do that. In fact, I'm not recommending you do anything in particular. As always, I'll say it again, I'm not a physician, so I don't prescribe anything. I'm a professor, so I profess a lot of things. What you do with your health and your medical care is up to you. You're responsible for your health and well-being. So I'm not going to tell you what to do or what to take. I'm going to describe what the literature tells us and suggests about ways to access plasticity. We know we need epinephrine. That means alertness. Most people accomplish this through a cup of coffee and a good night's sleep. So I will say, you should master your sleep schedule, and you should figure out how much sleep you need in order to achieve alertness when you sit down to learn. All the tools and more science than probably you ever wanted to hear about sleep and how to get better at sleeping and timing your sleep, etc., and naps and all of that is in episodes 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the Huberman Lab podcast. So I encourage you to refer to those if your sleep is not where you would like it to be. Your ability to engage in deliberate, focused alertness is in direct proportion to how well you are sleeping on a regular basis. I think that's kind of an obvious one. So get your sleep handled. But once that's in place, the question then is, how do I access this alertness? Well, there are a number of ways. Some people use some pretty elaborate psychological gymnastic. They will tell people that they're going to do something and create some accountability. That could be really good. Or they'll post a picture of themselves online and they'll commit to losing a certain amount of weight or something like this. So they can use either shame-based practices to potentially embarrass themselves if they don't follow through. They'll write checks to organizations that they hate and insist that they'll cash them if they don't actually follow through. Or they'll do it out of love. They'll decide that they're going to run a marathon or learn a language or something because of somebody they love, or they want to devote it to somebody. The truth is that from the standpoint of epinephrine and getting alert and activated, it doesn't really matter. Epinephrine is a chemical, and your brain does not distinguish between doing things out of love or hate, anger or fear. It really doesn't. All of those promote autonomic arousal and the release of epinephrine.